Hey there, and welcome to First Dates Soulmates. I'm one of your hosts, Nikki.
And hi, I'm Meg.
And on today's episode, we are discussing the new release by R.S. Gray, Their Last Resort. So this one was my choice for us to discuss today. I have read most of R.S. Gray's work and for the most part, really enjoyed it. I feel like she writes really kind of like snarky, strong female characters, doesn't too often go into the realm of like, oh, I'm just such a girly girl and big strong man, which is not my thing. So I asked Meg, I'm like, hey Meg, can we read this new release? It's coming out on May 1st. There's like a hurricane. It's kind of like enemies to lovers, a little bit of forced proximity, which I know is Meg's catnip. So their last resort. Meg, what were your overall thoughts and feelings about this book?
My overall thoughts about this book is that it was well written, but I had some major issues with the heroine. I thought that she was a little flighty and immature and didn't really have a goal in place. So by the end of it, I was like, I don't know if you actually accomplished anything. It felt a little skittish. You know what I mean? A little scattered.
Yeah. I think generally speaking, we're on the same page with the heroine. You know, some things there just in terms of her personality and how they ended up getting together. That was like a little bit, I don't want to say, a little bit young adult, a little bit of wishy-washy for me in terms of like stakes and direction, especially when the book was positioned as there's a hurricane coming. Like these are natural disaster level stakes. And it kind of felt like,
Yeah, by the time the hurricane hit, they were like, oh, we're just going to hang out in the hotel, which I love, a like forced proximity that they are trapped in a hotel together. But even that felt like it was a little bit rushed and like the hurricane didn't feel like the buildup was there. It was just like, oh, tomorrow there's a hurricane. I guess we should all get in rooms. And that was it. Like it didn't feel as grand as I expected the hurricane to be or as destructive.
Yes, the hurricane was not in their pants. Instead, it was in the construction. So before we hop into the discussion today, I'm going to share with you the official book summary from Goodreads. And then we're going to get to talking about hurricanes and what was going on with this woman and this man on this island. So Their Last Resort by R.S. Gray, Paige Young and Cole Clark are polar opposites. A world traveler since birth, Paige loves to lead activities for guests at a luxury island resort in Turks and Caicos. From bingo nights to cliffside hikes, Paige is up for anything. Cole, meanwhile, prefers his number-crunching desk job. He's the assistant director at the resort, stiff and meticulous. He's so by the book that he keeps the book in his desk drawer. They're perfectly aligned in one way, though, their ability to drive each other crazy. Every day brings a fresh battle of wits. They're rivals, arch nemeses, and they're definitely never going to talk about that one time they kissed. But when Paige finds out that Cole has been ordered to fire her on the same day a hurricane threatens their little slice of paradise, it's clear the game is over. At odds, in peril, and forced to shelter in place together, these two enemies might finally have to confront their true feelings. You know, the ones hidden under all of those withering looks. Their Last Resort by R.S. Gray. Meg, okay. Again, I usually love this author. I find she writes really refreshing female characters, and I find she writes really good dialogue between the two main characters. And I felt like that was maybe missing a little bit in this book. I want to talk about Paige because you brought her up. Man, what is going on in Paige's brain?
I think it's really hard for me not to deconstruct a book as how would I tell this differently or how could we improve the storytelling of this particular character. And I think the thing that was missing from Paige for me as a character was that she felt like she was adrift, but she wasn't clinging to anything, right? So her backstory was her parents were marine biologists and they traveled all around the world. And she was basically just like a tag along with their research. And so as she grew up, traveling the world, backpacking, not having a home, she felt very like adrift and nomadic. And then she finally decides to take this job in Turks and Caicos at this resort. And I wanted her to either feel connected to the resort in some way, like this is finally home and I want to hold on to it, or I wanted her to feel a bit more restless, to be like, oh, I've been here for 2 years. What's next in my life? But I didn't feel that tension of she's been adrift for so long and now she has a permanent place and she's about to get fired from it. And what does that mean for her? It was just like, oh, I'm about to get fired. Oh no. But like, if she'd been traveling for that long and she finally got to a place where she had long-term relationships and she finally got to a place where she had friends, even if, her two friends, Camilla and Lara, like they were closer with each other and she felt like a third wheel, but like they did care about her. So I wanted either there to be like, oh, I finally have friends and it's about to get torn away from me, or I don't know how to have friends and that's why I'm a little socially awkward and I wish I knew how to like be in this situation, because she is socially awkward. She's very physically capable, she's very likable, but it was like she didn't know how to have a deep relationship. And if she could have established that, even if it was in behavior, maybe she wasn't aware of it herself, but if it was like, oh, I have always been in these shallow relationships because my family moved so much, then I felt like I could have connected a little bit more with why she was so hesitant to get into a relationship with Cole, why she kept pushing him away.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a good point, because again, with her background of having really nomadic parents, typically how we see those types of characters in their adult life is they tend to go very much the same. So very footloose, fancy free, putting down zero roots, and then they find the value in having roots, or they go the complete opposite, more to how Cole is described, like very kind of like rigid and seeking so much stability to the point of probably going to the other extreme because they didn't have it as a younger person because the parents were going all over the place. So one, I was like, that's typically how it's done. Cool. Like she seems really nice, but yeah, like I found her personality really weirdly drawn in that she's capable and fun, but she's super awkward. And she also is contributing to the fact that the island doctor is busier than he's ever been because everybody who goes on her excursions is getting hurt in some way, whether it's her fault or not. So it's just like, I'm like, is she capable and competent? Is she an idiot? Is she,
and like,
kind of ditzy? Because none of the people's reactions to her really kind of landed on any one of those, which I found a little bit confusing.
Right. And if that had been the reason that, like, if they were going to say, oh, she's too much of a liability, we have to fire her, then I also would have felt a little bit more connected to it. If she was like a little bit flighty because she's running the hikes and she's running the excursions and people are getting hurt. And then part of her character arc was, by the time the hurricane comes, she does triage for the doctor and realizes just how much his work is problematic, just how much she's contributing to his workload and trying to change her behavior. If there had been some sort of arc there, that would have made more sense to me too, if she was flighty and then she became more responsible by the end. But I didn't see that happen either. It wasn't, I want to fire her, the Cole's boss. Like, it wasn't, I want to fire her because she's increasing our liabilities. It was, she's a clown. She's not helpful.
Yeah. She was a little, and I think clown is a great word because that's kind of the vibe I got from her. I'm like, I almost didn't respect her in a way, because it was, she's running these excursions, but she seems incompetent at organizing things. Like, I would have loved it because she does have these things where she trips over her words a lot in front of Cole or says stupid things. But to me, it appeared as though that was happening because she was a bit of an idiot. Mm-hmm. But then we're supposed to believe that she's competent and she is essential to this resort, not just because Cole wants to keep her there, but she does do a good job. But every time we see her in her professional role, she's causing harm. People are complaining, even though like they're complaining about sometimes shit that she can't control. Like, I didn't see whales. Like, why didn't you bring me whales? Like, not her thing. I work in hospitality. I know how that goes. Right. But like, I didn't quite understand. So one of the things, okay, I was looking up a couple of different reviews of this book because, again, for me, this was a bit of a departure for Gray, again, who's normally an author, I think writes female characters very well, and I wasn't quite seeing that here. I kind of wanted to see what the temperature check of this character was. And something I saw in multiple reviews that I would love to get your perspective on is people were describing Paige as a pick-me girl.
Can you define that for me?
Pick-me girl energy. So pick me girl, I believe, is more commonly, the term was almost created from Meredith Grey with Grey's Anatomy.
Oh, when pick she me, is choose like
me, trying to go over direction. pick me, choose me, love me. That is kind of what coined the term for a character to have pick me energy. It's very much like her going, just pick me, but why not me? Like, do love me, choose me. And instead of coming into it like, you would be fucking lucky to be with me. So do you feel that Paige has pick me energy, like some of these other reviewers were noting?
You know, I don't think so. I think she was almost like oblivious to her own feelings, which would not be pick me energy. The fact that she like made this false belief that Cole was actually her enemy when there was not actually any enemies to lovers behavior happening here. She just decided that they were arch nemesis because they bantered a lot. And like she made a bad first impression and then decided that they were she assigned the term enemies to them, even though it really wasn't. Like I sent you a message. I was like, Nikki, I expected enemies to lovers, and this is not. This is a workplace romance, but this is not enemies to lovers. She's just too immature to recognize that she likes this guy, so she's going to pursue someone else that isn't interested in her. So maybe that's the pick me that they were thinking about, is when she had this like maybe. When she was going after the Blaze character, which is like he's the bartender and he's kind of a bonehead. And I also thought that that was really weak writing, that it was just like, well, he's dumb, you know, like
he's dumb. I think the joke that Gray made in the book, that again some reviewers have called out for being not great, is this idea that because he originally said, so the resort is in Turks and Caicos and Blaze is his bartender that Paige is flirting with, you know, to try and get the attention of Cole and be like, look, I'm going on a date, I'm desirable. And she kind of asked him like, how did you get here? And he goes, oh, I thought I was going to Turkey. And he ends up in Turks and Caicos. So then Paige makes a comment about him that said, if he had ended up going to Turkey, he probably would have bartended for ISIS. And it's like, clearly that's the only thing that's over there.
Right, and like she was a world traveler. She would know that. Like it would be one thing if she had been the one who had been from like suburban Ohio and didn't have any life experience. But like she should know better.
She really should. If for as much as she's grown up around things, there was like a little bit almost like immaturity to her, which again we typically don't see in characters like her who have traveled as much as she have and have to change their home base as often as she has. Like we typically don't see immaturity as a part of that. We might see like romantic immaturity because her lack of, I'll say, roots, but typically your interpersonal skills have to be better when you move around that much because you're constantly being put in front of new people, you know, changing schools, new relationships, new cultures, whatever. So I was a little bit shocked. What is her deal? Like,
yeah, and then like to look at it from,
I was really missing.
And the piece that I also was missing a little bit, and I tried to dig it out, is why is Cole interested? Because she seemed like kind of an idiot, right? And so I like went through and highlighted. I'm like, here's in his perspective, because this is dual POV. He says, yes, she's beautiful. There's not a soul alive who wouldn't notice that. But she has this vitality about her. Like she's the physical embodiment of a sun goddess. Her beauty isn't her personality or her persona. She doesn't stare in the mirror and admire herself because of the way she looks. She appreciates her body for what it can do for her. Hiking, biking, singing, dancing, acting totally insane for the sake of entertaining hotel guests. But it's like, so even there's he loves her because of her vitality, not because of any, like she's clever, she makes him laugh. Like there could have been something else there could have been a deeper connection there, but it was just like, well she's a sun goddess, I can't fire her.
I kind of liked that there was dual POV in this because I was getting so little from Paige that I really liked seeing inside Cole's head. And when I hear that description, I'm like, where was that from her? I didn't really see it, but I did like. So I'm going to kind of move over into Cole now.
Well, I want to quickly say, like, the choice to do dual POV actually felt very strange to me here. Because often the structure of this, he's been in love with her the whole time and she's completely oblivious to it, is single POV. It's only the heroine's perspective because then it's a big reveal that, oh my gosh, he's been in love with her the whole time, but he's shy. He's a little bit socially awkward. He doesn't know how to deal with his feelings. Every other book that I've read that's set up this way, which is like quote unquote enemies to lovers, but he's only mean to her because he doesn't know how to talk to her, has everyone that I could think of was all single POV. So I felt like almost like the reveal of him being in love with her in his internality early on felt like a little like, it didn't feel like it paid off to me.
Ooh, that's interesting, because I would say the majority of ones I've read are dual POV. I very rarely read single POV with this. This is interesting because with Cole
I've read he's in love with her, but I haven't read that she thinks that they're enemies because he's mean to her. Like, I don't know. There was a mismatch.
Yeah. So like for him, he literally keeps the rule book for the resort in his desk. She kind of comments like he has a color-coded 5-year plan. He works in operations. Like he's very like by the book management. And as someone who works in operations and who
I was wondering,
teams, I'm so sorry. What is wrong? And why do we paint someone as being rigid and unfeeling just because they have a color-coded filing system? I am an extremely emotional person, and I love a good color-coded filing system. I just don't like that the narrative shorthand for like an uptight manager who below the surface is full of passion is how he approaches his job. He is a manager of a department who later gets promoted into a big thing because of this weird crime reveal in this book. But like, why are we not beyond? And they do the same thing with like, women managers or women in leadership positions. She's uptight. She's this. And what I didn't like about her perception of Cole and why I did appreciate dual POV is she sees him as this like rigid kind of cold and unfeeling. But when we see from his POV, he is shy. He is a shy introvert who also likes going to the gym. So of course he's built, who, likes to talk to people. He likes having his own home, and he has this own little home life at this resort. That's why I really like the dual POV, because from her perspective, he is one note. So I'm like, why do you like him again? But from his perspective, he's like, the sun goddess thing is weird. I don't see it. Why do you like her? Whatever.
Right.
But like, he's shy and he doesn't have great people skills. And I actually really appreciated that. As someone who is similar working in operations and has very few people skills.
You have excellent people skills, Nikki. I don't know what you're talking about. But I wondered if you were going to bump on the operations piece as being like code for uptight and rigid. For me, I read this as coded autistic, but not called out. And that bothered me.
Interesting.
Because I have a kid on the autism spectrum. So I read a little bit more into it. But this idea that like, he is rigid in the way that he approaches things. He wants rules to be followed because that's how he sees the world. And then they just blamed it on his parents. Like, well, my parents are accountants. And I'm like, what would have been a lot more interesting is for him to get some support that is like, hey, let's talk about, like, maybe the reason she didn't like him is because he wasn't great at eye contact, right? Like, there are things that they could have done that would have been, you don't have to come out and be like, this character is autistic. And probably, like, Paige probably has ADHD, right? Like, they would have worked together well. It doesn't have to be on the page of like, well, let's compare our diagnoses. But I thought that it was coded without being overt, and it wasn't enough for me. And it was almost like that was the joke, which it was written very, very cleverly. Like there's this one line that I highlighted because I loved it so much. She's thinking about him and she says, I wonder if he has any dating profiles. I imagine his bio reads like a job posting. Cole Clark, age 30, seeking full-time romantic partner. I enjoy pivot tables, closed loop communication, and achieving corporate synergy. Benefits, requited love at fair market rate. Right? Like, it was clever, but it was very stereotypical, archetypal, and didn't have a lot of depth to it. Yeah,
and again, that maybe it's just because I'm offended by the operations perspective of this. Like, there seems to be, and this is going into my entrepreneurship journey here. We often hear that in businesses, you're either like rocket fuel. Gina Wickman's rocket fuel. This term, a visionary and integrator, and it's something that I hate, because it assumes that you're one or the other, or you're stronger in one versus the other. And that like a visionary is the big idea out, this kind of like, oh, I have the dreams. I am the what's his name from Apple, like the Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs. Thank you. Whereas the integrator is the behind the scenes person. They don't like the spotlight. They like order and they don't like surprises. And it's, this, and this. And I just find that to be such like this false binary within business that when I see it in books, it really bothers me. Because again, I'm like, aren't we past this? Like, isn't there another way to show someone's like work personality versus their real personality? Because again, I work in operations. I am Cole in this situation with a little bit of Paige's ADHD, but there is structure to things, especially when you're at a resort, especially when that resort is coming under threat of a hurricane. You need somebody organized and calm and logical, but that does not mean they cannot think creatively or be an extrovert. And I am offended for operations professionals the world over to be shown in such this way. I have dreams and ideas too, and I like a really good spreadsheet and pivot tables. Thank you.
I feel like our preparation for this episode is in a color-coded pivot table. So I guess the two of us kind of...
It is true. Thank you. Okay, so Meg, what did you feel about like the evolution of their romance? Because when they first meet, like Cole is already working at the resort. Paige is coming in, like her flight was delayed. I think she lost her luggage. So when she finally shows up, she's late to their appointment when he was supposed to meet her and like show her to staff housing and all these things. She's late. She's like dirty. She's cranky. And she immediately is like, he was judging me. He's an asshole. What did you feel about this first initial meeting that we see as like a flashback, I'll say?
I feel like he would have been more accommodating and she would have explained it and then it would have been over. If you show up late to a meeting, you can be like, hey, I'm sorry, my flight was delayed. Or if you're moving to a job, then that person would have your flight information, right? Like there would be a certain level of accommodation from working in hospitality that you would expect that. He would be, if he was really this color-coded pivot table guy, he would have known what flight she was on and he would have been like, oh, she's running late. Or he would have had her phone up. Like they didn't exchange phone numbers.
Her. I'm sorry. Nobody called or texted and said, I'm so sorry I'm running late.
That's all. It just felt like there was this big buildup to like why they, again, a lot of the structure of the story was good, but there are these little moments where you're like, they could have butt heads. Like they could have disagreed fundamentally on the approach to how to communicate with guests. And that would have been a much better like conflict than just, well, I was late and he seemed mean. And then I decided I didn't like him. He's my arch nemesis. And like everything in her perspective got so like overblown because she was very childish.
I definitely think it was overblown so that when they actually like kind of start, there are the startings of stirrings, I'll say, prior to the hurricane happening, there's all like this, like, it feels like there's a false tension. And then, as it's in the description, there is a moment that they do kiss. Like she finds him on a beach. He's reading a book and she's like, oh, typical book reading man, like quiet, antisocial guy. I like books, lay off. But then like she gets him to like jump in the water, like to kind of strip down to their underwear and go swimming. And they're like, there's this big kiss. And then there's like that was a mistake. We're never going to talk about it again type of moment. But even the buildup within that moment itself, I was like, why is this happening? Because there was if this was supposed to be a catharsis, which is one of the reasons why we tend to like structures like, Grumpy Sunshine or Enemies or Dislike to Lovers, is there's typically like, there's tension being built up and then there's the catharsis that is usually they have sex or they kiss or there is some type of like,
there's some sort of like release valve. It's a release valve, right?
Yes. Right. But the release valve here was, it didn't felt like it was releasing much of anything. It was just like they've been kind of like cranky and fighting, like in the hating game, which is another example of kind of this like enemies or dislike to lovers bit. Like I'll talk the movie specifically because I haven't read the book in a while, but the movie specifically is so much banter and there's so much tension. So when that catharsis moment happens in the elevator,
that elevator scene,
making out in the elevator, it's very sexy in the movie.
Especially when she's going to a date with someone else. Like the tension is high.
Yes, like it makes sense. Like from a terms of release, we can see how they got there. At that point in their story, I don't quite get how they've gone from like I was late and for whatever reason didn't communicate. he was mad that I was late, but didn't ask me why I was late and give me a moment to explain. We're just like, we don't talk like adult people who work in an organization. Like, none of that communication structure exists.
Maybe we should have a performance evaluation where we can discuss how we can communicate better, right? Like, all the if he was really that good of a manager, they would have hashed this all out. Like, it would have been fine.
Yeah. So then for them to have like this first kiss be this like supposed catharsis of, I'm partying and I see him being a loner with his book, and I'm going to get him into the water, and we're going to kind of like pseudo skinny dip in our underwear and prance around. And all of a sudden we kiss. And then the very next day I'm like, oh, I wonder how he's going to react. But he's the first one to say that was a bad idea. And then all of a sudden I'm like, he's an asshole. We will never speak again. And I will talk shit about him. And he doesn't, like, I don't know. This initial moment didn't make sense. So when it happens later after the hurricane and this whole one bed thing, which I'm sure we'll get into, like, there was no closing of loops happening here to build anything.
And then, like, okay, so big picture, the pacing of this book,
yes,
felt inconsistent to me. I am all about, arrive in the moment, start with a bang, have that, and then have some backstory that talks about how they had this tension between them, and then the hurricane comes. But I think my like gut reaction to this is, I wonder if the reason that the pacing of this book doesn't work is because there's this backlash among readers saying, I'm so tired of the third act breakup. And when people say to an author, I'm tired of the third act breakup, they go, great, I won't break them up in the third act. I'll just slow burn them longer, so that way it takes longer for them to get together, which is a choice to slow burn it. But it leads to a fundamental like pacing issue, because you're like, oh, are they still doing this? Right. So like the backstory of they've kissed, but she's not interested in him because she liked him too much and he doesn't like her. And so she's going to go after this other guy and he's going to come to their dinner and then it's not going to work. And then she's going to go into his office and ask for his advice, which is not in character. This is something that she would do.
Very weird.
And then finally they get together because of this hurricane, but they're not supposed to get together. And then they're in the room together. And instead of like acting like an adult, she just moves all the freaking furniture around the room, and then the lights go off, and they should kiss in that moment, but they don't because he trips over the furniture because she's an idiot. And like, they didn't finally get together until 70%. There was the midpoint turning point was the hurricane. That should have been the moment that they finally had a conversation. But even in the moment where he says, I don't want to fire you because I like you. And why is it that I'm making this choice now? It's because I like you. And then she doesn't react for another 50 pages while she's like, oh, well, let's just go to the vending machines and get food and we'll have fun. And like, she's freaking out internally, which is fine to have this freak out at this guy that you likes you, fine. But it was just like the hurricane didn't hit until 40%, and then 50% they're finally in the room together, and then they don't do anything for it. Just like it took too long to get there, and then the denouement was too fast and she had zero growth. He was he became the protagonist of this story at the 50% part mark because she had no conflict. She had no change in the third act, which like she just moved into his house. Everything went so smoothly for her that I was just like, this is not how this is supposed to work.
Yeah, and it's interesting with so I want to talk about the hurricane.
Yes, please. I went like big picture, but like the hurricane felt very minimalist. It should have been a much bigger source of tension.
Here's the thing. So if we think about like the use of natural disasters in stories like this, it's typically done to like raise the stakes because there's danger. We have to take care of each other. We might not have access to resources that would keep us in contact with other people, like phone or internet. So, all we really have is each other, and that naturally allows for closeness.
She didn't even charge her cell phone. She did. And then she was like, why is my phone dead?
You know what? I don't even really care about the cell phone thing. The thing for me, though, was like, basically a hurricane is coming. The decision is made to move staff out of the staff housing on the edge of the resort and into the resort itself for safety. And people have to share rooms with multiple people, or one or other multiple people. And Paige's, the person who she was supposed to room with, this other woman who works at the resort, it turns out she has been dating in secret the guy who Cole was supposed to share a room with. So they decide the world is ending. I'm going to hook up in the hotel room that Paige and the woman were supposed to have. So sorry, Paige, you have to go find somewhere else. And of course, the only place open is with Cole. But here's the thing. They are in a luxury resort that is big. The hurricane lasts one day and they have other places to go. So the idea of a natural disaster isolating someone so they actually have to sit down and have these tough conversations isn't present because they're still connected to so many people. There are people across the hall. Her friends are still at the resort. Even if they said, Paige, there's no room for you to sleep in our room because there's 4 of us sharing a room, fine. But like there was nothing after the hurricane that was like, one, they were only hunkered down really for a night or so where they,
and he was working for most of it,
had to be there. And so like you either have to make the natural disaster bigger. We are trapped in a root cellar after a tornado and we're here for 36 hours. And that's really like, we literally can't go elsewhere. Or 2, like it has to be like longer or something, because again, yeah, it's like, okay, cool. The hurricane's here. Guess what? We're fine. Power's out in one wing of the resort, but it's not out in the other. And the fact that she got as much time off as she did and didn't have to help clean up or help serve guests, and like Cole was really the only one outside of the room. Like if the purpose of the natural disaster is to force proximity and force conversation so that like the truth comes to light, why pick a hurricane at a resort when they are still close to everybody and everything? Because I could just go next door. I could go to the vending machine. Like, so that as a device didn't make sense to me to get the result I think it was supposed to create.
I completely agree. And like, I don't think the hurricane was even mentioned until like 30 or 40% in. And then it was only like, there's a hurricane coming and Cole's boss thinks that we shouldn't lose money by shutting it down. I can't remember the boss's name.
Trevor, something with T, I feel.
I thought it was like Kevin.
I don't know. Let's call him Bob. Their boss, Bob.
Yeah. So anyway, like like the boss is an idiot, and that's the only actual conflict in the book. There is a perceived conflict between them, but the only actual conflict is this boss is stealing from the company. But like the fact that he's stealing is not breadcrumbed through the first half.
Mm-hmm. We just think he's an asshole.
We just think he's kind of a messy eater at first. Like that's all that you get is like, he's not that engaged and he's a messy eater. And then again, this is something that could have been stretched a little bit longer. So Paige is like, my paycheck didn't come through this month. Or like, oh, people are getting fired all over the place. And I wonder why, because we still have all these people who are coming in. And like, it could have been 2 or 3 sentences through the first couple chapters to be like, you know, Cole seems like he's running this place, but like, things aren't quite as smooth as you would think they should be. Like it could have been very simple and it just wasn't even alluded to. And then the whole idea of Cole is going to discover this discrepancy and he's going to take it to the CFO, who has not been mentioned until this moment. Like it just felt like there was an enemies to lovers for the first third, and then there was this hurricane that came out of nowhere, and then there was this corruption scandal, but there was not a clear linear like lines through threading all of
it. There wasn't necessarily a through line through it. So for context, for those who haven't read the book, you know, Cole is told by his boss, who I'm going to call Bob, this like sketchy dude, you have to fire all these people. One of those people includes Paige. He is like, no, but I like her. And I actually like that he kind of wanted to like save her job because he liked her. It seems like something we don't typically see. And I thought that was just kind of a cute moment. But, you know, he's like, well, you know, this boss is an absentee boss. It's one of those situations where it's really Cole making all the decisions, but this guy has the title and the power and the salary, but really he doesn't do shit. And he's like, well, how can I save her? How can I save her job? And he starts doing deep diving into his boss Bob, and he remembers like, oh, he told me that like he gambles, and I remember him showing me pictures of his new car. He must be embezzling money, must he? So he decides to request all of these expense forms. And again, Cole's character is painted around the staff with it. When he asks the woman in finance for a copy of the expense reports, she's kind of like scared that it's him calling her, like, oh no, I'm about to get the axe. This is dangerous. Or when Blaze gives Paige a drink, that he's not supposed to, because staff's supposed to pay for the alcoholic beverages. But Blaze sees Cole coming. He goes, oh no, his face drops. And then all of a sudden he discovers this corruption scandal where his boss has been embezzling funds and stealing things. So he decides that, well, I need to get him out of here. I need to get his job. I need to save Paige's job. So he gets all these expense reports together and prepares them all so that when the owner of the resort comes in, and the CFO, they're like, here's all these reports that show you he has embezzled $85,000. I'm sorry, 85,000. He embezzled, sure, but like 85,000. I was expecting like several hundred thousand.
Yeah,
to be the thing. And then when the character is like shown this, when the boss is like, haha, we got you. Then the boss goes through this slapstick, weird kind of exit from the building where he starts trying to steal office materials and a computer monitor off the reception desk. And he's like yelling on his way out of the building. Then, of course, Cole gets his job, is promoted, woohoo for Cole. And then he promotes Paige to like head of excursions. Like this, to your point, where was this the entire way through? Like if it had been introduced early on against, this is a threat against Paige and her job, but also Cole's progression in his own career, and then they get derailed by the hurricane, maybe that was a moment when Cole reveals to her what he's doing and they decide to go in together to remove this shitty boss. And
that would have been so much more
interesting.
interesting.
More sense to me.
Yeah. And it would have been like, because here's the thing, it's not like a third act breakup needs to happen, but there does need to be a conflict. And so if your characters have the same goal, then the third act conflict can be a synergy where they come together and they defeat the conflict together, which is often what you see in paranormal, in fantasy, in a thriller, where there's an external conflict and the couple comes together to fight the conflict together, to solve the mystery, to kill the bad guy, whatever that is. And usually in contemporaries and in historicals where there isn't like a big bad that you're fighting against, then the third act conflict can be more of an internal conflict. Usually there's like an external push that says like, oh, you guys need to break up. And then the internal growth that each of them has, and then they come back together, right? But in this case, it was, okay, now we're together and we're so in love, and I've been secretly in love with this girl for years, and now she's living in my house, and now I have to go save her job. And she's just like, she's not even involved in this whatsoever, but she gets the promotion because he goes and saves her. And like, it felt like a very weak, like, oh, I'm going to promote my girlfriend versus proving that she has done the work. And I think this could have been much more easily, like, it comes back to Paige's goal. Because Paige is listless, because she's restless, because she's traveled the world, and now she finally has a home. If her goal was, I want this to be my home forever, and she wasn't getting promoted, and she had this threat of having her career taken away from her, hanging over her head, then there would have been some internal tension of, should I stay or should I go somewhere else? Or if, on the other hand, she was on the other end of that spectrum and was like, I've been here too long, now I need to go find somewhere else where maybe I can get a promotion at the next job now that I've established myself. Maybe there was even like, as I was thinking about how I would have written this differently, I would be like, oh, maybe there was an external person from a neighboring resort that came over and was like, Paige, you're doing a great job. I love your approach to excursions. You're underutilized and underappreciated here. Let me give you an option to come work for me in the Bahamas, right? And she would have that conflict of, I like my friends here. Maybe I could see something with Cole, but now I have this opportunity to move somewhere else. And is my career or is my friendship more important? And like, again, it would have been 3 pages of writing that would have been added to it, but it would have added some depth to her of what she didn't deserve the promotion. She'd never proven that she was competent enough to run the department. And she even says like, well, I mean, Lara's in the department and she does just as well at me. I just care more, right? Like she couldn't even justify her own promotion. And so when this happens, when you finally get to, okay, now they're together, we have no idea whether or not she was planning on staying in Turks and Caicos, but now her boyfriend has a house, so she's just going to move into with him because it's easy, right? And then he gives her a promotion so that way they can work together and they can have this, like, everything is just handed to her. She doesn't earn any of that happily ever after. She's just this like manic pixie dream girl who shows up and Cole just gives her a life. And that was really disappointing for me as a reader, honestly.
I I'm agreeing with you. All right. Before we wrap up, Meg, anything else to say about Their Last Resort by R.S.
Well, I
Gray?
guess my question for you, now that we've been talking about this for 40 minutes, is like, would you recommend this book, or is there a different R.S. Gray book that you would recommend and be like, go read this one instead? I know I'm putting you on the spot with this particular recommendation, but
no, this is an excellent. I would not recommend this particular book. I think if you want to read a really great R.S. Gray book, I would probably go for her Dean Harper and Julian Lefray book. It's a duology where they're somewhat related. The Allure of Julian Lefray. Dr. Dearest is also quite good. The Bow and the Bell, and The Allure of Dean Harper is the other part of that duology. Most of the time, her books are definitely, I would characterize them as like fun, snappy dialogue, very smart characters who know who they are and what they want. That for me was a little bit lacking from this one, but I would definitely recommend those other ones.
There was a lot that I did like about this book. I liked the character. I liked the setting. It kind of fell flat in the implementation. So if you were looking for a book like this, if you were looking for a book that is based on a destination that has an enemies to lovers vibe to it, I would recommend instead read The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. The plot of that book is that they are in a wedding together. So her sister and his brother get married. She's the maid of honor. He's the best man. They are the only two people at the wedding who do not eat from the seafood buffet, and everyone gets violently ill. But their honeymoon, the couple's honeymoon, is non-refundable. So the maid of honor and the best man, who have never gotten along, pretend to be married so that way they can go on this free honeymoon, so it doesn't go to waste. And then they go to the resort and they have to pretend to be married, but they don't like each other. And then his boss shows up, and so they have to continue the ruse. And it's like the conflict and the tension is there in a way that this one doesn't have. And they actually are enemies.
I like it. I like that a lot. I do like Christina Lauren. She's a great author. All right. Well, before we move into the close, a gentle reminder to give us a subscribe, leave us a star rating and review. This really helps people find us, helps us move up the charts, and show this fun little new show of ours to other people. So we would greatly appreciate that.
All right. So Nikki, before we wrap up, what have you been ranting, reading, writing, or raving this week?
Oh, okay. This is a great one. So one of my favorite kind of authors, so we've got Lucy Lennox and her sister, have finally released the final book in a series that has been many, many years in the making. It's called HEA, Happily Ever After, and it's in their After Oscar series. So this is a series basically that focuses on different couples in each books, but the central character through all these books is a rich billionaire named Oscar. And much like the movie Good Luck Chuck, he's kind of characterized by being like a little bit of a man whore, has a lot of boyfriends. But after he breaks up with someone, they then go on to meet their soulmate. They meet like their one. So one of the kind of running jokes is like Oscar knows everyone, and he's been the best man at almost every wedding he's ever been to because he somehow got the couple together. So finally we got Oscar's book, and he is the subject of the last one, and he gets his happily ever after, and it was great. Oscar was such a fun character. He has like a little pet hedgehog that he takes around with him to all of these events. He's a little bit eccentric in that way, but his happily ever after with the man he ends up meeting and having his happily ever after with, just so well done. It's such a cute series. It was nice to see in this final book callbacks to all of the couples from the previous books that we had either had their entire book or that we met as a side character in someone else's book. So very, very happy. It was many years in the making. Highly, highly recommend. It was a great book.
I love when they put like a bow on the series of like, this is the thread that we've been carrying. And here we go. Like, this is the wrap up. This is the satisfying happy ever after of all the happy ever afters. And I'm sure like also you got to revisit all those old characters from their standalone novels because they came to interact. And so it almost probably felt like a reunion.
It was very, very nice. It was very satisfying. Happily Ever After, book 5 of the After Oscar series by Lucy Lennox and her sister, Molly. And Meg, over to you. What are you reading, writing, ranting, or raving about this week?
I finished the manuscript of my novel and got it uploaded to advanced reader copies. One of those things where like I said to one of my writing friends recently, she was like, "Oh my gosh, you finally did it. It feels like it happened so quickly." And I'm like, no. This has been 2 years in the works. And there's something really satisfying and also terrifying in doing that, because as a self-published indie author, there's nobody who's saying to me like, okay, now it's done. And so it was a kind of mad scramble to the finish to say like, is it ready? How do you know when it's ready? Because I don't have a publishing deadline. This is the debut novel. And so it's very satisfying and also like a little bit intimidating, but I am thrilled that it's going out into the world, that people will be able to read it. And so if you are interested, if you're listening to this before July 25th and you want the advanced reader copy, shoot me a message on Instagram at Bailey Seaborn Author. That is my pen name. We'll make sure to put that in the show notes, and you can get yourself a copy, an early advanced copy of Peppermint Bark No Bite, because it's ready. Yeah.
It's ready, and I'm going to brag and say I already have an advanced reader copy. I know you're jealous. All right, that is all for us today. Thank you so much for checking out First Dates and Soulmates. Don't forget, you can follow us on social media at First Dates and Soulmates. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from.